Thank you for joining us today for the program Look Before You Speak. We have a very special guest on today. For any of you that have not seen the program before, part of the concept of this program is the opposite of commercial television. Commercial television flashes images up at an average of 1 to 2 seconds and keeps the images up for that amount of time and has really conditioned us to look at imagery in that way. And this program invites guests on to take a closer look and a longer look at images. And we have so many gifted scholars and people in the Missoula community, and this is a way that we strengthen our ability to work about, talk about, and look at, and support art and artists in our community. Today we have Brandon Reintjes on, and Brandon's the senior curator at the Missoula Art Museum, and I'm just thrilled to have him on. And he's brought some images with him, and thanks for coming on, Brandon.
Thanks so much, Steve. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So what kind of images have you brought in today?
Well, I think that we're so lucky in Montana that we've got such a wealth of ceramic artists working in our midst, and so I thought it would be fun to start with ceramic artists, especially with the example of Rudy Audio.
Oh, that'd be great.
Since we all know and love his work so well, and he's done such an amazing job for the development of ceramics, kind of out of a hobby craft into a fine art. And one of the things I was thinking about was this. Isn't that a great image? This is an atypical form of his, as you know, and I brought that one specifically because I think it's really interesting. He kind of got renowned for those lobed forms, the ones with the
amorphic figurative work.
Yeah, big fins and big ears, and people have really strongly associate that with his work. And it was only a little bit later, kind of in mid 2000, early 2000s, that he started returning to this big bell form, and it's one that I just find really fascinating. They're as you know, they're enormous pieces, and they weigh upwards of 100 pounds. They've got these really interesting little openings that you can see at the bottom in the base.
I actually remember when he was making this, and one of the things that he was talking to me about is returning to this shape, which he had actually done earlier in the 1960s. And he hadn't done very many of them, but he had never really gotten the bell shape out of his system from, I think it was 63, 64. And then just the approach of kind of this classical banding, which is really different.
It really is.
Amorphic work.
And the reason I like these forms is because I think it relates so strongly to what he was doing architecturally. You know, you're thinking about those ceramic murals that he did very early in his career, and how he used that as a canvas for those architectural pieces. So
that bell shape was just had such a more classical feel to them than there it is.
And if you think about that bell shape as being classically rooted, and you think about the origins of that bell shape and some of those Greek crater forms, which I think we have a couple images here coming up in a minute, or perhaps even a Japanese bell shape, kind of a.
And I think that brings
Buddhist
together, his influences of both Asia and Northern Europe that
exactly
informed his passion and sense of design. So
this is the Japanese temple bell form, and you can see how strongly with that that relates to Rudy's shape with that handle on the top, and then that generous swell that comes down and makes the form, and just how that creates such a wonderful volume for the artist to work with, and how that's how the decoration on that is minimal, but he really used it as a canvas to kind of springboard off of. And I think you're right. It combines his two influences so perfectly. When you think about, he always talked about Munakata as one of his favorite printmakers, with those free-floating figures kind of tumbling through a space that's a very abstract space.
Yeah, and I think he also never departed from, he loved drawing and the looseness of the line that the figure inspired.
Yeah.
He was all about that, and I just love the fact you brought these in today. That's great.
And then here's the crater from the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection, and you can see exactly what you're talking about, that center banding as a perfect place for this narrative to unfold, and you can read it from right to left and all the way around, and that's certainly how Rudy thought about using this form, was to create this center area where some sort of an action would unfold. And I just love the way on Rudy's big bell form, how the narrative is there, but it's really nondescript. It's not a very definitive narrative where you're limited. It's maybe not a straightforward narrative that has a beginning, middle, and end. It's more of a universal narrative.
I also think that in all of these examples, even the bell shape, Rudy never got away from the whole concept of a vessel, of a container. And that in itself is a classical reference. And we're so fortunate to have had him here in Montana, and just establishing, it's not necessarily a school, but certainly a freedom of approach in the ceramics community here.
We had a bunch of students come through the Missoula Art Museum just on Friday, and they were from Bozeman, and they knew the story of Frances Senska, famously kind of ushering her students, Rudy Audio and Pete Volkus, to investigate the Archie Bray Foundation. But they hadn't seen a Rudy Audio pot before. They had two kilns at the school that they've named Pete and Rudy. They named these kilns, and they were firing work, making ceramic work in these kilns, and they hadn't seen one.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was so fun to show them, one of these pieces, this kind of homespun art that's so powerful and evocative.
And it's a big part of our history and our story. I'm glad you brought those in today.
And the story of modern ceramics. I said it's amazing. We always give Pete Volkus kind of credit for going out and doing all these wonderful things, but Rudy really stayed here in Montana. Being from Butte, going to school in Bozeman, and then founding the ceramic studio here at the University of Montana in 1957. He changed the world, the art world, from Montana, from keeping his foot right here.
Well, I think an important message too is with both Rudy and Leela, and we recently lost Leela, but that we really need to reinforce to younger people that yes, there's important art being done in New York and LA and Seattle, but there's important art being done here too, and
that continues to be done here.
And it's people need to elevate and celebrate artists in our community, and there can be family members or your neighbors, and really celebrate those people in your community. So.
And that's part of the images that I brought with me today, where they're all artists that are working, with the exception of Rudy, but I thought he was a good starting point, a good touchstone. But as we move forward, the person who took his place at the university, Beth Lowe, we've got some images of hers coming up next.
Great.
And I think that these are pretty typical of Beth's work. You know, she was, as you know, born in Lafayette, Indiana, to parents who had come over to escape the Japanese Sino War. And so she grew up with these intellectuals who wanted to come to, intellectual parents who wanted to come here and study and really sought that freedom of intellectual expression. And she ended up at the University of Montana in 1985. She came in the 70s to study with Rudy and then ended up taking over the ceramics department. But I think a lot of her work really questions what it is to be Chinese American living here and figuring out things. And I love her work. These wonderful. She does functional work as well, but here we have some of her sculptural work, and you can see where she's really rooted her practice in investigating those questions.
And I also think it's the thing you see with Beth's work is it's a departure from the vessel, and it's a departure from scale at the it's focused on communicating a message, and a message about who we are, where we're going, what it means to be here in this day and age, and she's a beloved teacher.
And she really uses those pieces to confront a lot of the stereotypes about Chinese American immigrants, and she really tells a story in a different way. I think that she kind of thinks about her childhood experiences, and you know, she's illustrated with her sister a couple of children's books, and I think that her work really lends itself well to investigating that narrative that happens within our culture. So she's just really wonderful. And the reason why I brought her is she's been internationally recognized over and over again, and yet here she is living in our community. One of the images that I brought is this piece called Breathe that was featured at the Korean Biennial, and she was one of a few invited artists.
Oh, wow.
And you can see this. It's another sculptural piece made up of lines of swimmers, much more multimedia. There's some fans down in the foreground blowing gently across these plexiglass pools of water. And here you can see the swimmers doing the backstroke and the breaststroke, and lined up, kind of receding into some distant horizon there. And on each of the figures, there's a small gold luster bubble of breath that captures that each of the swimmers' breath.
And where was this installed?
This was in Korea, so it was an invitational piece, and she made it here in her studio up the Rattlesnake, and then flew over to install it. And it's the big Korean ceramics biennial, and so she was the featured artist there. And it's really a remarkable accomplishment for an artist living in our communities to have an accolade of that stature bestowed upon her.
I think it's wonderful. It's kind of a extension into an actual installation.
Yeah.
All of these elements into.
That's when I like her work the best. I mean, I love her functional work when you have this beautiful little cup, or we've got a pair of little salt and pepper shakers that I just think are fantastic.
Oh, these.
The ones that I have in my home are a matching set of foo dogs that are kind of warding off evil spirits, and I think that they're great little vessels for holding salt and pepper. You give your food an extra little spice and
Yeah.
ward off evil spirits at the same time. But
Yeah.
just her little functional pieces are so, they fit so comfortably into your life and into your home. But the work that she's doing with her installation pieces, I think, is really dynamic and incredibly strong. And so you've got this artist who's kind of got this dual practice in addition to her love and dedication to music.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
she's just an engaging, multifaceted artist who's, I think, at the height of her career and in the height of her powers, and the work that she's doing now is more exciting than ever before.
Yeah, I think when I look at the glazing and color on those pieces, I see a little bit of influence of Rudy on her. So
Where it doesn't necessarily follow the form, you
Yeah.
kind of have these wonderful modernist colorations that appear.
and also the love of this line that defines the figure, and the actual form that she's drawing on kind of suggests a figure, but not really a figure. So it's kind of, yeah.
You're right. She's got her foot in that complex three-dimensional
Yeah,
drawing.
yeah.
So, yeah, pretty fantastic.
So what else you bring?
Beyond that, let's see what the next image is. We've got this piece by
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Chris Dufala, and he's also at the university right now. He's been in Montana and did a residency at the Archie Bray Foundation.
And this is ceramic.
This is ceramic, yep. And if we move up close, you'll see the wonderful combination of textures and surfaces
sure.
that
Look at that.
he does. And it's a piece called Withering, and he's right now at the University of Montana as Trey Hill's sabbatical replacement, but I think he was first introduced to Missoula through a residency at the Clay Studio of Missoula, which
That's
has
right, yeah.
done just an enormously wonderful job bringing artists into
And this
the
is ceramic
community.
as well, right?
It is, and he falls within that that category of trompe-l'oeil ceramics. And you think about Paul Dresang or Richard Shaw or Marilyn Levine.
Vernon Patrick, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
Yeah,
he was the one doing the paper bags.
yep, that are just wonderful.
Yeah, and that's really cool. That's really cool.
The thing that I think about Chris's work that I think is really interesting is that he doesn't, he's never there just to fool you. Like you don't look at that sculpture and think, this is wood and this is metal. You know that something's not quite right, and you always know that the way that the metal is warped, or sometimes it has stress cracks from being made when it's ceramic. You always know somehow that it is ceramic, despite the presence of a wood grain or some sort of metal riveting or things like that.
I see a relationship in that particular piece, and in other pieces I've seen of Chris's, to maybe Rauschenberg, some of the way of putting different metaphors together and enjoying the accident when it happens.
I think that they're incredibly complex.
Yeah.
You're right to bring Rauschenberg in. They're really wonderful studies in concept. He can draw just about anything. He's really rooted in drawing, and he grew up in southern New Jersey, right across from Chaddsford, Pennsylvania, which is, of course, is the wonderful heritage with the Wyeth family. And so you think about the example of N.C. Wyeth and his children, Jamie and Andrew, and just their ability to render everything and anything in such remarkable, hyper-realistic detail. And I think that was a very early example for Chris, and he was really able to think about rendering and the power of those images. And so when you look at his sculptures, and sometimes you see these perfectly drawn fingers or wonderfully emulated objects. That was the beginning. And the thing that I think is so strange about him is he uses those as signs and signifiers to combine with those three-dimensional objects to get that array of complex thinking and happy accident.
And I think he's always limiting. He's never, when you see that work, he is never overdoing it. And oftentimes when somebody's just beginning, and I'm not saying Chris is just beginning, but artists who begin to put these things together, sometimes they have difficulty limiting the number of metaphors that they're putting together. And Chris, it's always just right.
He always holds back a little bit to allow that mystery to develop.
Yeah.
And you come with your own associations, and then you kind of develop that idea. I agree. I think it's this piece in particular is really remarkable. It was in the triennial exhibition at the Missoula Art Museum, and over the past several months I've come across, he's shown so many places, at the Brink here in Missoula, Frontier Space, the Archie Bray Foundation, and I've just really been thinking about his sculpture, and he uses monotype printing with underglaze, and he casts sections of his studio floor or other floors that he finds really enigmatic, and just puts these things together with slip casting, or not slip casting, I mean press molding, hand building, and some of that monotype along with the drawing. And I just think it makes for, it's such an unusual process, but it creates such a satisfying art object and experience for the viewer.
Let's move to the next image, and what else do you bring in? Oh, wow.
So this is a piece by Sandra Del Poggetto, and I've been thinking about her work as well. She's an artist that's living and working in Helena, Montana, and this is one of her American fork pieces. And these are really large-scale canvases that stretch close to 9 feet. You know, they're just really immersive experiences when you see them. And when she's thinking about these are the direct result of her experiences of walking in the landscape. And I love saying that because it's so unexpected and atypical. You know, you'd think, how did she arrive at these abstract paintings that are filled with mark making, and how is she thinking about, you know, the Montana landscape and moving through the landscape? But they're just really satisfying paintings, and I've really come to enjoy not just this series, but her whole approach as an artist.
And she's been at it for a long time.
Really a long time, and she's always thoughtful and really thinking about different ways to explore this.
Really deliberate.
Very deliberate. Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and she works a lot with mixed media as well.
Yeah, anything under the sun. When you look at these pieces, they're charcoal and oil paint and soft pastel, oil pastel, graphite. And you can't tell from these images on the screen, but oftentimes she pierces the canvas and pulls little bits of rawhide or buckskin through. And she calls these danglers, but they're these little things that project out into your space, and they look like little gobs of paint or marks until you look at the canvas from the side, and you see these projections that are coming off of the surface. But
it is amazing to me that, you know, I think oftentimes people associate Montana with a particular kind of art, and we just have people doing so many different things, and things that aren't necessarily about the romantic narrative of what was going on 100 or 150 years ago, but that it's a different kind of storytelling in Sandra, and it's has a very serious scholarly approach. You know, I think of Sandra now.
Very, very deliberate practice and a lot of thought, and really she does a lot of trial and error. The reason I brought these paintings in is I had an experience recently that really reminded me of her work. And I walked up on the conservation easements north of Missoula, those really lush rolling meadows, and counted all the wildflowers that I could see here in April. I think I came up with 13 or 14 different wildflowers, and at one point it was right at dusk, and I sat down and I could hear meadowlarks sounding off, kind of sitting up on high things and calling. And there was one behind me, and one ahead of me, and one to my right, and one to my left. And there must have been 7 or 8 meadowlarks, but that sense of being surrounded spatially by something and not really able to place it.
Right.
I think that's really how she organizes her canvases and these marks.
And, you know, you look at those paintings and you think, well, gee, those are really abstractions. But, you know, listening to you talk, you could you could speculate or say that these are realistic.
I think so.
It's on an experiential level, they're about realism.
They capture the experience of,
Yeah.
of being in the landscape more astutely than most landscape paintings that are show a mountain and a sky and things like that. So,
well, let's move. You have more images?
I brought a few more in, but
Great. Oh, wow.
These are pieces by Willem Volkers, who we both know and love, and he's just an amazing artist. Originally from the Netherlands, he moved first to Seattle and then to Montana quite early on, and he continues to practice just outside of Bozeman. And recently, I think that some of the work that he's done has just been really remarkable, and you can see that they're also kind of in between sculpture and painting, and he uses found objects.
And they're very. I mean, he has a specific message that he's communicating too.
Very, very message driven and very, very focused. Oftentimes he uses neon, incorporates neon, but. John Kelsbeek and I drove to Portland to pick up some artwork and saw his installation at the Portland Art Museum where he received the Northwest Art Award. And it was so great to revisit his work there and to think about. And I was reminded of this project that he's been working on called In Memoriam, where he kind of came across the startling news that 166 of his classmates from the Montessori preschool in the Netherlands died in concentration camps. And most of them, the students that didn't make it through the war, were from earlier classes. I think they were classes in the early 1940s, where Willem didn't start until 1944. But that knowledge that these same children that he ended up going to school with ended up dying. And so you see a lot of his work is also about immigration, much in the way that Beth Lowe's work is. It's about him being here in America and coming across these kitschy objects and kind of confronting these myths of America.
Yeah, and the suitcase is just representing the transientness of all of this turmoil that he had gone through.
Yeah, this displacement and this sense of travel and relocation and all those things. I think they're great metaphors.
Yeah, and of course, when you look at these things, they are very crisp, very attentive to detail.
He's a stickler for details. That's
and
for sure.
He is obsessive about edges.
Yes.
And that's really great. I mean, not all art is like that. So there's like a graphic feel to it. Yet, when you put all the things together, sometimes they feel serendipitous.
Well, and I think they're more than the sum of their parts.
Yeah.
He's taking these paint by number paintings that are kind of the everyman approach to painting. You know, anybody with a painting kit could produce some of these, and finding these kitsch objects. But then when you add up all the little pieces of these experience of all together, they create this wonderful experience that's really visually and spatially satisfying. And I think the next image is an installation of the university gallery here in Missoula, where he worked with students to install this piece called In Memoriam. And these are the 166 suitcases that stand in for those students from his Montessori preschool.
Right.
And they've got each student's name written on them, as well as the place of their death and,
Yeah.
and the date of their death.
Willem at one time had told me that he actually had met Maria Montessori.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And she had come to the school. And, you know, she had a very strict approach on how she inspired creativity. And he can talk a great deal about that. And I don't know many people with a life story like Willem's, and he sure brings it to the surface and, you know, helps inspire us. And you know, I think art can teach us so many things about ways to live and choices and better ways to live and better ways to treat one another. And I think Willem's work touches on all those big issues. You know, even though you look at it and you think, well, just a suitcase, but it's a really powerful, he uses really powerful metaphors.
And I brought the work of these 5 artists because I think it is the elements of their life story and how they use that story kind of as the springing off board for these really wonderful aesthetic investigations that we saw here to create these enduring works of art that end up being more than the sum of their parts in really wonderful artistic experiences.
You know, you look at these 5 very different people and doing really different kinds of work, and but it's contemporary, it's in our time, and you know, that's the wonderful thing about the time and place that we live, is that we have all of these gifted people around us, and none of them is going to bite your head off or anything. I mean, they're totally, because we live in Montana, these artists are accessible, other than, you know, Rudy and Leela both having left us recently. But artists are accessible, and they're part of the fabric of our culture and of our everyday life. And so we're very, very fortunate. And there's, as you know, there's lots and lots of artists in our community that are part of the community, part of the fabric.
This is just a small smattering.
Yeah,
that's for sure. It's we're incredibly blessed with a communities across Montana that are really rich in artistic merit. There's just an enormous number of artists living and working across the state.
You know, recently you and I were on a small panel talking about and discussing Jenny DeWeese, and you know, we also live in this place where I would say the early modernists of Montana, which would include Bob and Jenny DeWeese, and
as well as Rudy and Leela.
Left us a legacy of, you know, is the opposite of the dog-eat-dog, more competitive art world that may occur in more metropolitan areas. Yet all of them believed in the vitality of the work that was being done here, and celebrated it and traveled and were supportive of one another. And that's the legacy that they have left us, is be supportive of one another.
I still think of Montana as artistic community as cooperative and grassroots. I think that even though it's changed so much since the early innovations that those folks inspired, the modernists, but you're right, they really paved the way for the state of contemporary art. And I think that things like the Clay Studio Missoula, the Clay down in Red Lodge, Clay Center in Red Lodge, and the Archie Bray, these residency programs really still contribute, but it's more than that. There's a broader impact.
Well, and I think you look at just the programming that's come out of the university system, both Bozeman and MSU Billings, University
the tribal
of Montana,
colleges,
and tribal colleges. Yep. And one thing I think is kind of remarkable about the art community in Montana is there is a breakdown, and I think that it's a little bit unique here. There's a breakdown between the academy and those that are self-taught, and people mix freely. And I think that occurs here without any pretentiousness. I mean, you can have all kinds of degrees, but you may be attending an opening of a self-taught artist where you're elevating what they have to contribute in your community.
Yep.
And I think
without pretentiousness, but also without hierarchy. We don't preference any of the university professors who are artists over a supposedly self-taught artist. I think that we find people on equal footing and take them for their artistic
and
practice.
I think that has come out of that legacy of the modernists.
I think you're right.
Like Jenny or Leela always talking about other artists. Hey, have you seen that work?
Yeah.
Have you seen? I mean, most of the time you're around artists, they want to talk about themselves. And, you're around Rudy or Leela or Bob or Jenny, and they wanted to talk about stuff they had recently seen. And it may be, down in some neighborhood in Missoula or Bozeman, or, go down there and check out what this person's doing. Because it's innovative, challenging, and part of it. They embraced as part of the community. So
that's something that we can continue to do, I think, is advocate for emerging artists and really look at the artists who are trying things out and seeing what can happen.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today.
Thanks, Steve. This has been fun.
Yeah, I just, I'm hoping this program helps us in really looking at art and really taking some time to absorb what we are looking at and seeing and developing a dialogue and ways of talking about work. So thanks for coming on, and please join us again for another program, Look Before You Speak.